session, the current status of V2X in USA and Europe. The intent of this session is to give you a bit of view of where the thoughts are among the different stakeholders, and I hope I can go to the next slide. So first, the session, I'm Paul Spaneman. I am from Inamo in Monaco, and I will moderate this session. The session, I go to the first, explain the context, then a short speaker introduction, then we have a presentation of about 10 minutes each, where one or two real direct content questions can be asked, and then we have a Q&A and a closure at the end. So, yeah, what you've seen in every of the regions here in the world, that the reports we get is that V2X direct communication is required to facilitate realization of governmental road safety and automated objectives. And what we would like to do is, where do we stand today? For this, if I'm allowed to go again, very strange. We have therefore a number of speakers. We have Jeffrey Bellone from the DOT, economist and system engineer. We have from the European side have Gzim Okakoglu, thank you, from the European Commission, and he's active here in the US as connection to the activities in the US. Then we have Martin Boehm, who is the managing the zero projects in Europe. And from the car side, we have Honda Sube, from Toyota, John Kenny, and from Volkswagen, Alin Steveno. So Jeffrey will explain the current status and issues with regards to V2X in the US. Gzim will show the European framework for ITS deployment. Martin Boehm will clarify CITS services are being deployed and operative along European roads. Volkswagen will explain the car-to-X deployment in Europe, and John will give an insight on the USA V2X status, and then Sube will close with a nice title, I would say, The Power of Dreams. So let's see, I'm getting curious already. So I would like to invite the first speaker. Jeff, could you approach?
Look here. Okay. All right, hello everyone. I'm Jeffrey Bellone from the US DOT Volpe Center, and going to present on the current status of V2X in the US. Going first here, I think it's important to provide some background context. I think everyone who's in this room realizes why we're doing what we're doing, why we're interested in V2X. But you know, it's important not to overlook the potential impact that these technologies have, right? I mean, in the U.S., you know, we lost almost 43,000 lives. We came out of the pandemic where less people were driving to work, and somehow we still have an unacceptable number of traffic fatalities. And then, as we can all attest to, probably getting from your hotel to here in the morning, congestion is an issue, right? So beyond the real human life threat, there's also congestion and mobility concerns that we know that V2X can address in several ways. So today I'll talk about kind of where within the US things stand with V2X technology in terms of regulatory, the technical, and then some of the issues as we think about deploying. So the current status, as I'm sure many are familiar with now, the 5.9 gigahertz band that used to be called the safety band was reallocated by the FCC. The lower 45 megahertz has been designated now for unlicensed use, leaving the top 30 megahertz of that previous 75 for ITS operations. There is also a transition from the DSRC, dedicated short-range communications technology, that would have operated in the 75 megahertz, to what's called C-V2X, but more specifically right now, LTE-based V2X. And there is a second report and order by the FCC that is still pending right now, where the rules are being defined for exactly how ITS will operate in that 30 megahertz, and we'll talk about that a little more in a bit. Because, so there's a couple of things going on that's changed the environment in the US. So one is the regulatory and the available spectrum, which we just discussed, and the other is the technology that continues to mature. Back in 1999, when the safety band was first allocated for transportation, you can imagine, if we all hold up our cell phones, actually this is an older one here, iPhone 11, I know each year they're coming out with a new one. A lot has changed, right, in the wireless communications advancement of technology, right? So as everything is moving along, in parallel in that field, we're able to do different things. And then obviously standards are evolving, particular for transportation in that direct communication, or known as PC5 for C-V2X. So when we talk here about assessing a new radio technology, that is US DOT. We have done extensive testing over the past 2 years, as we did with DSRC, on C-V2X devices, or as I said, particularly LTE-based devices. And what our testing showed is that if you have two vehicles approaching each other at high speed, so what would represent a high danger traffic scenario, they're able to effectively communicate within about 450 meters. And again, this is a lot of summarizing from a lot of data that we'll talk about in a bit, under low to moderate congestion, and under certain interference from the adjacent channels in the band. And we'll talk about more about that actually in a separate session tomorrow. We did testing in lab, closed track. It was actually a decommissioned airbase that gave us enough space to run the vehicles and set up the congestion, and also some limited real-world environments. We did reveal some engineering issues. This is more implementation. It's what you would expect with the new technology, as you have new chipsets, and then you have device makers that are integrating that with their hardware and software. And then as that goes up to the safety application. So there's still work to be done, but we at least have, I think, gotten a good baseline of the radio performance and its ability to support the types of things that I discussed at the beginning, to address safety, to address mobility, environmental, et cetera. So now just talking about sort of the path, what we're calling the path to deployment. USDOT hosted a V2X summit at the end of August, where we brought together stakeholders from industry, state, local DOTs, ITS America, device manufacturers, all sorts of, it's a big group, right? It's a big umbrella that has to come together to make all this work. And they came to the summit, and I'll share some takeaways we have from that. As I just discussed, we're doing testing. There's several funding opportunities to help promote deployment. Dr. Hampshire talked about this in his address in the introductory to this World Congress, about some of the SMART grants and ATTAIN grants, where there is eligibility to deploy C-V2X. I already discussed the FCC's second report and order. That is still being developed. That is still, that defines the rules of how this technology will operate in the new 30 megahertz space. And then I saw Jason in here. There he goes. He has his coffee up from OmniAir. Certification test procedures are in development, and that is another key piece to ensure we have interoperability and conformance to the standards. So from this summit, a lot of topics were covered. As I said, we had a vast group of stakeholders. We talked about NTSB, talked about the safety promise of V2X. We talked about grant opportunities. We had several panels with both deployers from state and local agencies as well as from industry. ITS America presented their results on a survey about which applications were most likely to work within the new allocated spectrum. And we also had a discussion about how we have to broaden the conversation about ITS communications to, while dedicated spectrum is important for the latency requirements for several V2V safety messages, there's also opportunity, as I mentioned, with the evolution and maturity of wireless communications that you could achieve some benefits outside of that dedicated spectrum. So we talked about that as well. So giving sort of three high-level paths that came out of the summit, we had a lot of breakout sessions, we took a lot of notes, and we pulled from that. This is sort of reflective of what we heard. So one is advancement of the technology. People want to be sure that, especially if you're a deployer, that if you're going to purchase this technology, that it works. I'm hoping our testing helps answer that a bit, but there's still some work to do there. Testing for interoperability with different chipset manufacturers. Installation guides for IOOs, right? So this is all new, and you have a lot of state and local agencies that might not have the technical knowledge of how to install a roadside unit. And installation guides is something they ask for. And then just sort of the evolution of how you have security and you ensure that when you are deploying this technology, it's deployed in a safe and reliable way. The second, spectrum rules and band plans. So while we know that the 75 megahertz has changed, right? It was reallocated 45 megahertz for unlicensed use, the remaining 30 for ITS. There's still rules that need to be defined in that second report and order. That is causing a delay right now because we don't know exactly what those rules will be, right? So you have 30 megahertz. There's requests for comment about using maybe 10 megahertz of that for some limited time at DSRC, and then you have 20 megahertz, the channel 183 for the C-V2X. But there's also sort of the question of the licensing process, and there's several waivers that I'll talk about in a bit that are waiting for people who are looking to deploy right now while these rules are getting finalized. So strategies for deployment. So this was, I'd say, the biggest takeaway we looked for in the summit was asking, what do groups need to deploy? Whether you are a state and local agency, an OEM, what do you need? And the big thing is market certainty, right? So we're at a different regulatory place right now. It wasn't long ago that NHTSA had put forward a proposed rule to mandate DSRC. Obviously, things have changed since then. We're not in that place now. So market certainty. How do you create that market certainty based on the current regulatory environment? Also, funding opportunities, which I talked about, and just really focusing on what those day one messages can be to deploy. And I know I'm running quick on time, but I'm right at the end, so this will work out perfect. So further analysis is needed. We're still doing some testing on in-vehicle interference. Again, I invite everyone on Thursday afternoon. We have a session where I'll present more on our test results and explain some of these bullets in more detail. Testing after updates have been made to the devices that we tested with. The alternative approaches outside of the 30 megahertz, considering what those are and what types of use cases they can solve. 5G's capability. So that there's a lot of analysis that needs to be done as this technology continues to mature. For USDOT, we're taking all these takeaways from the summit to create a collaborative roadmap that's not just USDOT, but also inclusive of our stakeholders in other key federal agencies like NTIA and FCC, and working with FCC and NTIA on granting waivers. There are a large group that is looking to deploy this technology. They have waivers in front of the FCC, and they're waiting for those to pass. So we want to help facilitate that. And then also just, again, working with stakeholders to continue maturing the technology, filling gaps, whether it's in certification, whether it's additional testing that needs to be done. These are the key actions that we're considering now. And then hopefully I finish just in time for you. But thank you. We'll take questions at the end.
Good morning to all. My name is Gzim. I'm the Transportation Counselor at the EU delegation in Washington, D.C. But I have a bit of history with the deployment of ITS, but before deployment, even the regulatory framework. When you think about the framework for CITS deployment, where this word cooperative comes now into place, it's not new. There is a foundation that we have in Europe. You must be familiar with the ITS directive adopted in 2010, which already envisaged that one of the priority areas was the communication between the vehicle and the infrastructure. So with the ITS directive, we adopted a number of specifications in different areas. And one of the successes of the framework, and in terms of implementation, was that we managed to have at least one cooperative system, so-called eCall, which was not something new, but it was the first system deployed in vehicles, in the infrastructure, and allowing to increase the safety altogether, saving lives. And this was done everywhere. It was mandated also in the vehicles. So you see that between, I would say, words and regulatory framework and policy and actions, things can happen, things are possible. But when you look at the evolution now that we have, and of course we've had a lot of progress with our specifications in a different area, road safety, traffic information, for instance, or others. We are now in situations, or I would say in a new environment where we have to deal with many challenges. I will not mention sustainability as a challenge overall, but certainly more than ever, we see that the use of digitalization, what we call smart mobility, is an enabler to achieve those challenges that we have. Just, again, talking about sustainability, we in Europe have put into law that we are going to be the first continent carbon neutral by 2050. And then into law, we have committed to reduce our greenhouse gas emission by 55% by 2030. It's not only a policy commitment, it's a law commitment. And of course, there are a lot of things that we have started to make this happen. But one thing is clear, the power of digitalization, the power of ITS, if you want, if we speak in this room with the people here, is there, is valued, but we have to think a bit differently. When we talk about smart mobility, when we talk about communication, we need to have cooperative systems, connected systems, and in the way to automation. Does that mean that it is the only way to go to automated vehicle? It's not the only way, but if you step back a little bit, when you think about cooperative, connected, and automated mobility, you have to think that it helps indeed bring all the pieces together, the vehicle, the infrastructure, cooperation, communication, exchanging road safety situations, exchanging all those elements, but also, and now I link it to the other objectives that we have in sustainability, to step back and think, how does that evolution on the vehicle side, on the road side, links with the overall pictures that we have, which is create something which is more multimodal. Of course, geographies can be different. US is a larger continent, the distances are higher, maybe there's less density. In Europe, we live with multimodality because we are a continent with much more denser, a lot of big cities. Public transport is there. How to integrate all this? How to give options to the people who need to use that? And that is the framework in which we have to think when we talk about connected mobility. And clearly, building on what we have done and pursuing the objectives and extending what we have in our framework with the ITS directive is what we want to do. Now, one of the elements, we have a big plan of action actually to realize this decarbonization of transport altogether. But one of the elements is we set ourselves the target to revise our initial framework. Why? Because we realized that, first of all, we confirmed that this framework was useful. It has been used. We have had deployment at different areas. However, did it go as far as really unleashing the full deployment of all the services and all the possibilities? We realized that not quite. And we needed to focus more on certain elements to expand it. When I say not quite, is that we had deployment, we had some successes, and we'll speak about one specific in a few moments. But very often, those deployments were really local, regional, and it's all good. Everything that we can do to improve the safety, security of the transport, even locally, regionally, is good. But we had expected that it would unleash even more deployment, and so we need to go further. Now, one thing that we proposed, actually, as a commission, about 1 year ago, and basically this revision is under discussion right now in the European Parliament and the Council. There will be soon a gathering of the legislators to decide on the fate and the future of this new framework, is to expand the areas in which we want to work. The four main areas are still very similar to the previous one, but we want to focus now. You will see that information mobility services was there in the past. It was called differently, but it's still there. Travel, transport, traffic management services. It's also there, even more important, because that's also one of the values and importance of using digitalization to have that. Obviously, road safety and security. This is one of the pillars and is still there. By the way, why it is so important in our vision or in our ambition to, I was saying, to reduce the greenhouse gas emission. In our strategy that we published, we also confirmed or reconfirmed the commitment to go towards zero fatalities, zero road fatalities by 2050. So this zero vision, we've also put that on paper as a main argument. It's there, and we are going towards that. By the way, Europe, we are roughly at about 19,000 road fatalities. We had a little decrease even during COVID, but figures are again increasing slightly. So, the hope that things would decrease during COVID, our ambitions and our objectives are still there. It remains something fundamental, clearly, and especially when we talk later about CITS. Last point, cooperative, connected, automated mobility. I explained to you that here in this area, we want to expand the meaning of this. We want to expand the possibilities, and that's one of the elements. How to do that? What are we proposing concretely in terms of modifications of our framework? One is to go one step beyond the ITS directive. The ITS directive was a framework to decide on certain priority areas that we needed to define specifications, requirements, in case a service would be available and deployed. And this has worked, and we had deployment. Some use those specifications. But here we realize that we need to go one step ahead. Let's try, of course, to mandate a number of elements. One of them is the availability of crucial data, and I'm talking here about real-time traffic information, road safety related. We want this to be made available to all and shared in all areas by all the different parties. Second element, we also want to go a bit further, and it's quite challenging, I have to say, in the discussion that we have with our member states, because, of course, they are responsible to implement that, is the mandate of a number of so-called essential services. Again, road safety comes as the first of those ones. And in addition to that, we have an extension or a reminder of what we can do, what we could do, what we should do in the area of cooperative ITS system. Now, we have done a big impact, what we call an impact assessment. So every time that as a regulator we propose a new regulation, you need to assess what it will bring in terms of value and what will be the cost of it. And with no doubt, there is a cost associated to implement it and to doing what I just mentioned earlier, but the benefits clearly surpass this. So there is, again, a value and importance to do that. And you see here the difference. the time saved benefits, the reduction in cost of accident. When you think we're talking about congestion, one figure which has not changed between now and 13 years ago when I worked on the ITS directive was that the cost of congestion for the EU is about, per year, 1% of the GDP, 170 billion euro dollars. We have parity now, so it's easy. So that's the cost of congestion. So every little step that we do by implementing some of those elements will help reduce that. So there is of course, there's a clear benefit to invest in those systems for congestions, and of course for safety as well, because the cost of the 20,000 people dead, not even mentioning the more than 800 light injured and 200,000 severely injured per year, the cost is also huge. Now, talking about CITS, for those who have been following a bit what has been happening in Europe, one of the specifications that we had proposed a few years back was specifically in the area of cooperative ITS systems. We had a very clear delegated act, we call it, the secondary legislation, to make this happen. Unfortunately, when as a commission you propose this, the final word is with our legislators, which are our member states and the parliament. In this case, a majority of our member states, of the countries, decided that they didn't want to approve the specification per se, arguing, I mean, you can discuss what were the reasoning behind, but that maybe it was giving a too much higher place to a specific technology, talking about G5 or DSRC, and there were some other reasons, potentially on the cost, but the fact is that it didn't go through at that time. But what is the good news? This piece of legislation, the specification, so how you should do that, is there, is available. It has been used by a number of countries, those who were willing and able to implement. And today we have already cooperative ITS systems on the road in Europe. OEMs that were pushing those have decided to start fitting their vehicle with that. We have 1 million vehicles which were sold with the technology that allows CITS. At the same time, those countries that decided to move forward went ahead, and we have 20,000 kilometers of roads equipped with CITS, and totally 100,000 kilometers of roads in Europe which are covered by CITS services. I will not say that much because I think Martin will tell us more about that. My point here is that when the focus is on road safety and efficiency, that's where things can be different. That's where member states and the ones who need or who believe that this can happen, make it happen. And at the same time, it's also a first step for automation. Very quickly, what next? Interoperability, cooperation, making sure that the road operators and cities build in. That's what we need to do. We also need to ensure that as we move forward, and if other technologies, we're talking about LTE, 5G technologies come along, we need to have, at the end of the day, a backward compatibility between the systems that have been deployed. That is also something very important as we move forward. Just a last, I will stop it here, I have a few more slides, but last slide to say that what is happening, what has happened, of course, has not come in isolation. It's not because, as a European Commission, you adopt regulations or delegated act that automatically you have the next 5 years after 1 million cars equipped and 12 kilometers. This required continuous engagement with industry. We had a number of research projects bringing together the stakeholders. We had a number of platforms. C Roads has been the most prominent lately. And moving forward now, we go to the next step. We have put in place the so-called EU partnership on cooperative and connected automated mobility. This will be the next element that will drive us to the next steps on what we're doing. So work has not stopped. Maybe one day we will have actually the CITS delegated act, maybe in another format. It's what we want to do, but things are progressing, and this is what I wanted to say, is that there is hope, and when you are able to show that you have real result, it can trigger the necessary elements. But we have to remain open. So thank you a lot for your attention, and looking forward to questions afterwards. Thank you.
Yes, it will be finalized fairly soon. We have been progressing very much. Now it's in the hand of our legislature, the European Parliament and the Council of the Member States. But we expect that if everything goes fine, probably by the end of the year, we may have the revised directive ready. Yes, we check this very often, and also we need to report anyway on the progress once we have the directive, on the progress of the deployment that we have. So that is being done every year by our member states. And we as a Commission, we also have to report that to the Parliament and to the Council every 3 years. No, absolutely, that's a very good question. We at the European Commission have put in place a framework for the deployment of CITS. And to do that, we need that the stakeholders, so the OEMs, but also the countries, are deploying the technology on the roadside. And so we have been financing a lot of the, and putting money, investing in the setting up of the C roads, and then the member states themselves deploy all this. So we are in a, it's like a public partnership together with the different stakeholders that we are supporting. Absolutely. I mean, it is very important also to consider all the stakeholders. ASECAP, as you know, those are the toll road operators. And they are also very important because they already have some deployment of similar technology, tolling. And we need to be sure that when we deploy CITS, there is no interference with the tolling technologies. So we are in regular contact also with them and C roads to have that. Police is the next step. Police represent the cities, and the next step in the evolution and deployment of CITS will be in the cities. So we need to better understand with them what are the best use cases, when we need to deploy, in which areas, and that is why we collaborate a lot with police as well. It is the priority nowadays in terms of infrastructure, is to make sure that infrastructure is decarbonized, the whole transport infrastructure decarbonized, but also is by nature safe and provides safety. So we have, you may have heard, a strategy to achieve that, and that's what we are aiming, to have a fully decarbonized transport system and an infrastructure that guarantees the safety. For that we need collaboration with all actors, the OEMs, the infrastructure, the authorities that manage the infrastructure, and so that's our goal. You know, when we do the rulemaking, we work together with the member states. As a Commission, we propose things, but then we engage with them to ask them, for instance, what makes sense, what is their availability to deploy, in which time frame. Yes, we're trying to put some requirements, but we work together with them to set something which is realistic as well. What I want to say is that I hope that we discuss tomorrow is also a source of inspiration for different partners and different other countries with whom we work. There are challenges in the US that we discussed this morning. In Europe, we've been able to move forward. But I know that in some other areas in the world, deployment is considered, sometimes starting. And we want to share our experience, and we want to learn also from those experiences. And so that's also a hope that we can collaborate with different areas of the world in deployment of CITS.